Welcome into another edition of Talkin Ducks, and a lot to get to, including why Oregon is the second happiest team after the college football playoff national championship. Then we'll get to a little bit of news, a little bit of player movement, some players staying for the Ducks, and we'll also take another look at next season in the Pac-12. And we'll talk some basketball as well, because Pac-12 hoop season under full swing. But let's go ahead and get to the opening drive, brought to you by Les Schwab Tire Centers, where they've been doing the right thing since 1952. And joining me, three guys that probably could have put up more than 7 points against Georgia. We have from the Oregonian, Aaron Fentress, Joey Harrington, and Anthony Newman. And gentlemen, it's weird to talk about a national championship game that was basically over in the first 10 minutes. And Joey, I think for Duck fans, the reason why this 65-7 rout Georgia had against TCU means so much is that it kind of shines a light on Oregon's opening loss to Georgia to start the season. And I imagine Dan Lanning sitting there saying, see, we weren't that bad. We weren't that bad to start the season. And your thoughts on just what we saw from Georgia to close out the season in the most dominant performance ever in a bowl game.
No, they weren't, Jordan. No, he wasn't.
I know. He was not sitting at the TV screen pointing CC.
Newman.
I know he wasn't.
If you're ever a coach, do you say, we only lost by 40? Like, no, look, you lost by 40,
I'm not a coach.
Okay? The other team happened to lose by almost 60. You both lost by a lot, okay? Look, I think it doesn't make Oregon fans, coaches, players feel better. At least it shouldn't if you're a real competitor. But what it does is emphasize the dominance of Georgia. It didn't matter if it's TCU. It didn't matter if it was Oregon. It didn't matter if there was majority of the SEC season this year. Ohio State gave them a run. And frankly, coulda, shoulda, been in that game, not based on, who was the better team, but, based on how that semifinal game played out. Look, if I'm Oregon, I'm not reading anything into it. If I'm an Oregon fan, I'm not reading anything into it, because if you have to read into the fact that somebody lost by 58 instead of 40 or 38,
42, right?
Whatever
46,
the number
46,
was, you're
46.
looking at the wrong things. You need to be focused on yourself if you're losing by 40 points in the opening game and trying to compare it by somebody else's 60-point loss. So there we go. I'm not even touching that one. Moving on.
Aaron?
Oh, I agree with Joey 100%. I did see some funny tweets here and there from Duck fans saying, well, they still not look so bad, but I think that, had Georgia wanted to score 60 in the opening game, I think they could have. I think they called off the dogs a bit in that game. So I don't think one has anything to do with the other. It just looked like Georgia was on a completely different planet than TCU, than Oregon, and most of the teams in the country.
So, Anthony, I imagine you agree with them, too, you being the ultra competitor amongst this quartet here. Does this take away some of the sting at all, or maybe help people forget about what Georgia did to Oregon to start the season?
Not really. This tells us one thing. It tells us that Georgia is really that good, and they're that better than anybody else. They are unreal. I mean, realistically, seriously. I mean, these guys have a lot of dudes. The guys who sit on the bench could start for Oregon and win all Pac-12. I mean, they're that deep. They're that good. They got a great coaching staff. They replaced coaches. Dan Lanning's here at Oregon, and somebody replaced him and did a pretty good job, held TCU to 7 points. Unreal. And I was looking at, wait a minute, this is like high school football. It should be running clock at halftime. If you're up by 30, the clock just keeps going, because it could get ugly, and it got ugly for TCU.
I heard Kirby Smart had to write a letter.
Hold on.
He had to
With
write
that
a letter of
logic, though,
explanation
shouldn't
to
we
the
have
Little
gone
League
running
board.
clock against TCU with Vernon, right? Because we were up by 31, right? So I don't know. Maybe
it was funny
Too
that
soon?
TCU trailed by 31 at halftime, and the last time they trailed by 31 at halftime of a bowl game, they ended up winning that game. The problem is Stetson Bennett's a little bit better than what Oregon had at quarterback in the second
We're
half.
not Oregon.
So because of this victory, I did
Georgia.
hear... Yes.
That's all he had to say.
That's all he had to say. Okay, cool. Awkward silence in the first segment. Love it, Anthony. All he had to say. He's done.
We're not Georgia.
Either
Silent.
way, Georgia dominant 65-7. Does it make the Ducks feel any better? No. If anything, it lets you show the chasm between championship caliber teams and where Oregon's trying to get to if they want to compete for a national championship. But don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll talk more about whether or not the committee got it right with TCU getting in there at number 3 and what it means when we expand the playoff here soon. We're going to take an actual awkward silent break here as we step aside. When we come back, plenty more. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber. Welcome back. Time now for our legendary moment, brought to you by Abby's Legendary Pizza. And, well, it wasn't really a good time for Oregon, but the last time they were in the college football playoff, 2015, they lose in the championship game to Ohio State. And so you saw what the Buckeyes did back in 2015. Now you fast forward to 2023 in Aaron, Georgia. If you're Oregon, you obviously have college football playoff aspirations. You took a coach from Georgia that helped guide their defense to one of the top defensive units. But what we saw the other night, how far away is Oregon from getting to even that tier that Georgia is on? Or is Georgia just in a completely different stratosphere and everybody's playing for second right now? Because that's the big question for Oregon. It's just, can you even get to that level again? And I think the argument is they haven't been there since 2015.
Right. And even that team, from a talent base across the roster, was nowhere near what Georgia had. You had Marcus, you had Armstead, you had Buckner, and you had a bunch of dudes who had no chance to make it in the NFL, but the Blur offense and Marcus sort of set the tone for what they were doing back then, and that doesn't really exist now. But I had TCU losing to Michigan. Okay, Michigan threw 2 pick sixes, and you watched that game, and athletically, Michigan looked a little bit better, but not overwhelmingly better. But you could tell that TCU had good players, but just didn't have elite dominant athletes. Now, Ohio State was right there with Georgia. Ohio State recruits elite high-end guys. But my feeling coming into that game with TCU is that Georgia was just going to be too big, too strong, too fast, too athletic. It's just a different level. And it was clear within 5 minutes that that was just like a fact. And there was nothing TCU could do. So the question is, can Oregon, which is striving to win a national title, get into that realm? Now, clearly, if TCU can reach the national championship, Oregon can reach the national championship. But can you actually win it by accumulating enough talent to contend with a team like Georgia? And I don't know. I've always maintained that no, because one of my things coming out of the Blur era was that they were going to have to improve recruiting to maintain themselves as a national contender, because the Blur offense's impact was going to wane in a bunch of different ways. You can still score points, but other teams were doing it too, et cetera, et cetera. And they haven't really done that. Yes, they've had high-end ranked classes, but as we've seen and as we've talked about, not all 4-star kids are created the same. They're just not. So you can have, oh man, we got 2 4-star corners. Okay, but your 2 4-star corners are not necessarily anywhere near as good as the 2 4-star corners Bama got, because there can be a talent gap between what these rankings say. This is one of the reasons why Joey and I bash ranking. But here's something to consider right now. Everyone's excited about what Oregon just did in recruiting, and they did a good job. Oregon got 2 of the top 50 ranked players on 24/7. Bama got 11. Okay? Texas got 6, SC got 4, Georgia 4, Miami got 3, 2 in the top 10. Now, the main kid everyone's excited about is Mateo Uiagalelei. Did I get it right?
Uiagalelei.
Yeah.
Uiagalelei.
Okay. Close enough. My bad, Mateo. Don't crush me when you see me. So he's ranked as a number 5th rated edge rusher. That's amazing, right? Bama has 2 of the top 3 edge rushers. Georgia has 2 of the top 6 edge rushers. Miami has 2 of the top 11. Do you see what I'm saying? So like Oregon can piece together some guys over 4 years that you go, wow, we got that far-side guy and this high-ranked guy. But these other programs are getting multiple guys like that every year, whereas Oregon is not. So when you play in those games against those teams, especially in the trenches, did you see those Georgia Cats? Like I guarantee you TCU's offensive linemen got into that game were thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do here? Because we cannot match up physically. And Oregon has had dudes like that, right? You had Nada. You had Deion Jordan. You had Buckner and Armstead. You had Thibodeau. Spread out over how many years? Georgia, 20. Alabama will have 3 or 4 of those guys in the same season. Right? And so that's one of the problems. Now, how do you catch up to that when you're recruiting all the way in Oregon, 2,500, 3,000 miles away from the hotbed of recruiting? You can't do it just from LA, because LA has got UCLA and UCLA getting, some of those guys. So how does Dan Lanning go and convince a high-end, elite-level, multiple D lineman, O lineman to pass up on LSU, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, Miami, Clemson, etc., and come to the Northwest? That's so difficult to do. So I still maintain what I've said over the last 10 or 15 years. It's going to be an extremely difficult needle to thread for Oregon to ever amass that kind of talent. And here's the last thing I'll say about this. This is why I think in part Mario left. One, it was Miami. And two, I think Cristobal knew that he could get top 10 classes to Oregon, but he can get better talent to Miami. I think Dan Lanning knows that he can get top 10 recruiting class to Oregon, but can he get championship level talent like he could get down in the South? And that's where I think at some point he bails and goes to a place where he thinks he can win a national title.
Real quick, Joey, I think Cristobal left because $80 million guaranteed at your alma mater also played a big role right there as far as recruiting
of course. But
I don't know.
Again, like I said, look at the talent level he's getting. It's a different level than what he got at Oregon.
Okay. Are you calling on me?
Joey. Yes. Okay.
Aaron,
first of all, great points, by the way, Aaron. Yeah. I completely agree with you.
It's okay. You got to belittle me.
That you said.
And here's the thing, and I'm going to kind of jump on the bandwagon or kind of jump on his point here, which was that the SEC has always had those bigger dudes. SEC has always had the guys in the trenches, right? And let's just call it the South. Texas, Clemson. Like I remember the Holiday Bowl. We go to San Diego and we play Texas, and it's Sean Rogers and it's Casey Hampton and Leonard Davis and Mike Williams. I mean, dudes who are just massive in the trenches. And that was always the difference between the SEC and those blue blood Texas, Clemson type big programs and the rest of us. The rest of us evened that gap with speed, right? And for, let's call it about 10 years, call it that 2000 to 2010 stretch, teams were able to outsmart, outquick, outscore some of those teams. That's how you saw the USCs, go on their runs. That was the time when you didn't see back-to-back SEC champions. What's happened, though, is a lot of those offensive guys who came from the West Coast, who came from those schools that had to be quicker and faster and more creative, well, they've gone to the SEC now, right? Sarkisian went to the SEC. Lane Kiffin went to the SEC. All those coaches who had those offensive ideas that were the things that beat the SEC, Nick Saban brought them in and said, come on, be part of our program now. So not only does the SEC play great defense and have the biggest dudes, but they can score and win. What was the Ohio State game? 51 to 49 or whatever that final score was, Georgia against Ohio State. They can win those games now, right? And so that's the difference is, yes, Aaron's point of they get all the big dudes now, they get the stronger guys, they're going to have that size in the trenches, which is what, the Oregons are always trying to catch up with. Oregon doesn't have the advantage of speed and offense and explosion anymore because those teams in the SEC are also doing that as well. So yeah, there was a difference in offense. The SEC for about 10 years was behind the rest of the country in offense. Not so much anymore. So now the rest of the country is behind in recruiting size and strength and those big dudes in size. And the SEC is on par offensively with the rest of the country. It creates a disadvantage.
Real quick before Anthony goes, do you remember it wasn't long ago when Nick Saban wanted to ban the no-huddle spread?
Exactly.
Remember that? Because he couldn't stop it. Because it took his talent and it spread it out. And guys like Manziel could take advantage of certain things just by the sheer physics of the game. And he was like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to just manhandle you and strangle you in the trenches. Now you're spreading me out. He wanted to ban it, and then he adapted those systems and got the receivers and got, Tua and other guys. And then he started dropping 40s and 50s on people and playing elite defense. So yeah, you're 100% correct. Newman, you.
Anthony, you got a little bit of meat left on the bone from these two. Your thoughts?
Well, since Aaron talked so long, I will be short and simple. I'm going to speak softly, so listen hard, okay? It's real simple. As a coach, I'm a coach, and as an ex-player, you win with dudes up front on offense and defense. If you have an offensive line, you're going to create time for the quarterback to throw the football. You're going to create holes for the running back. If you have a defensive line, you can get to the quarterback with just 3 dudes. That's a problem. When you're facing teams like that, you might have one like Oregon has sometimes, or you might have 2, but you don't have a bunch. The teams down south, they have a bunch, and that's why they keep going to the national championship. When Oregon played Ohio State in the national championship, when I got on the field and saw the offensive line of Ohio State and the defensive line, I was like, oh, we might have some issues because they were gigantic. And so, it really is. It's physics, okay? Those big boys up front, they can do some things. And then it allows you to get ahead with numbers on defense. If I can play with 3 guys up front and take the other guys in the back and do things in the back end, that's easy for me as a coach. You win up front, guys.
One other quick thing. I mentioned the elite D lineman they've had over the years. Nato's from Utah, Kayvon Armstead from California, and Buckner from Hawaii. So those guys, as elite as they weren't from down there. So that, if Oregon can get down there and scoop up some of those guys, then they got a chance. If not, it's going to be very difficult.
Last thing I'll add on to this 13-minute segment here. The last
We don't
two
need
teams
commercials
really,
anymore.
The last 2 teams either win a title or threaten from the Pac-12. USC and Oregon, I think it was elite coaching quarterback combination. You had Pete Carroll, Matt Leinart, Chip Kelly, Marcus Mariota, or Mark Helfrich, Marcus Mariota. I think if a team in the West is going to get back to this stage, it's going to have to be a combination of coach and quarterback that's going to be superior to the SEC. And I don't think you can say that many teams are out coaching the SEC right now. So something to think about as well, too, because you have to have somebody lead all those stars as well, Aaron. All right, when we come back, we'll get to some more Oregon news. Brandon Dorless, a big decision the Duck fans might actually like here. We'll let you know when we come back on Talkin Ducks. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber. Welcome back. Time now for some excellence on the football field, brought to you by Ferguson Wellman. Ferguson Wellman taking a disciplined approach to investing. Well, some good news for Oregon, especially on the defensive side. Brandon Dorless announces that he is returning to the team after saying his plan all season long was to remain in the NFL draft. He led the team with 9.5 tackles for loss. And so obviously that's huge for this Oregon defense. And when you take a look at some of the players that are draft eligible that were returning, you have Brandon Dorless, Mace Boone, and Popo Amave. Draft eligible losses, of course, Christian Gonzalez on the outside hurts, as well as Noah Sewell. But then how about the portal additions? Linebacker Justin Jacobs from Iowa, from Arizona State, linebacker Connor Sewell, and Alabama corner Kyrie Jackson. So, Anthony, I'm going to start with you. How are we feeling about Oregon's defense going into next season now that you can count on Dorless lining up in the green and yellow, sometimes silver, white, and black?
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important to start with your own football team. Recruit your own guys. Keep them there. I mean, guys are leaving all the time. Guys are going into the draft. And so now you got to look inside and go, okay, who's here? Who do we need to work on to stay here? And it also starts what we just talked about in the last segment, up front. And Brandon Dorless is one of those guys. And Mace Boone was another guy that you had to keep and start that defense up front and then bring in some new guys to help with that. I see in the transfer portal they got a couple of linebackers. I would like them to see maybe another experienced defensive lineman. I know they got the young guy, but you need that experience as well. The guy who's been in college for a couple of years, been in the weight room. But, Oregon can always get skilled guys. Every time you turn around, Oregon, they put a lot of DBs in the league. They put quarterbacks in the league. They put receivers in the league. Again, I keep saying this, sound like a broken record. You got to get guys up front. And you got linebackers. You got linebackers who run sideline to sideline, but they need to be protected by the guys up in front. Their defense, they're getting better. They'll get better.
I knew it was coming.
You knew it was coming. Aaron, obviously Dan Lanning was brought in because of what he was able to accomplish defensively at Georgia. You obviously don't fix everything in year one, but this is the side of the ball that needs to be addressed the most for the Ducks. And now that you're starting to see some of the pieces come together for this team through transfer portal, recruiting, guys staying, what do you make of it for next season?
Well, clearly keeping him is important because he was one of your more productive guys on a team that didn't get that much production from the defensive line in the way of sacks and pressure. I think they had 18 sacks on the season. You lost 6 with Johnson being gone. Dorless had 2.5. Now, he's not necessarily a speed edge guy, but you got to find some dudes who can get after the quarterback. Newman just talked about how invaluable it is when you can just rush 3 or 4 and cover with 7 or 8 and get pressure. That just changes everything. And Oregon can't do that. And they struggle to stop the run against Oregon State, up 21. And there's just a lot of things there. So keeping him is great, but man, they have a lot of work to do to find some young kids who can rise up and maybe get a couple more transfers if you can, because that is a very questionable area for this team moving forward still.
Yeah, Joey, you feel like, did you add enough pieces to replace the losses? I mean, Christian Gonzalez, Noah Sewell, 2 big-time players that were the heart and soul of your defense, arguably your 2 best defensive players. Yeah, you've got some transfers, some recruits, and Dorless coming back is nice, but are you really making up for those losses with these guys?
It's a tough question because we had the discussion at the beginning of the season, and I remember Anthony mentioning it a couple times about how Noah Sewell didn't seem to be the visible factor that he had been in previous years, right? Incredibly talented. Nobody's doubting that. Christian Gonzalez was a phenomenal talent. One of those guys that you just kind of stick on the side like, hey, you go do your thing, lock down whatever you got over there. We're going to do our team defensive stuff over here, right? What I think, if I'm kind of taking the 10,000-foot approach is, the loss of Justin Flo, Noah Sewell moving on. What bringing in these young guys, a few transfers, like this seems to be kind of I won't say addition by subtraction, but rather remolding and allowing some of those older guys, so those guys who were from the previous coaches, to move on and say, this is, we've had a year to kind of figure out who's going to fit in with what we're trying to do defensively, and then bringing guys to mold, right? I think this defense can be better. Absolutely. They gotta have dudes up front. Like, every defense has to have defensive linemen. That will happen. But I think that the pieces that are coming together are going to come together with more, more shape from Lanning and his staff, as opposed to kind of being still having somebody else's hands, have somebody's ideas, somebody's philosophies in the back of their head. They can have a true clean slate of guys that say, this is who we are, this is how we're going to play together, and that's all you know. Like, I think there's value to that. So that's kind of what I'm hoping is the philosophy behind this. Not necessarily trying to replace the exact talent that you lose in Sewell or Gonzalez, but rather put together a group of guys that can mold and play together well and do the things that this coaching staff is asking them to do.
Yeah, you also wonder just guys being familiar with the scheme for second season, the role that plays. So I agree. You lose some players, but you never know if collectively everybody stepping up can make up for that loss and how things move along in year 2. All right, stick around. Plenty more Talkin Ducks when we come back. We'll talk a little bit more about Justin Herbert getting set for his first ever NFL playoff start. Also, we'll continue to tease basketball a little bit later in the show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber. Welcome back. Time now for our rock solid pick, brought to you by Milan Stoneworks, bringing you the finest stoneworks in all of the Pacific Northwest. Well, hey, go ahead and go grab a killer burger and give a shout out to LaMichael James, because he has been selected to the 2023 College Football Hall of Fame class. James, who now lives in the Oregon area and has started to franchise a few burger stands of his own, now gets listed and enshrined forever in the College Football Hall of Fame, part of that class here. And guys, just your thoughts on LaMichael James, somebody that threatened the all-time yardage record before declaring to go to the NFL, bypassing his final season of eligibility. Duck fans, of course, know James was synonymous with one of the most dominant stretches ever in Oregon football history. And Aaron, we'll start with you, because I know that you had a relationship with him. Just your thoughts on him getting this honor.
So, I mean, obviously, a given, right? You rush for 60 billion yards, you contend for a Heisman, and take your team to the national championship game, win a couple Pac-12 titles, win a Rose Bowl, you're probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, a lot of people sort of equate Mariota with that era, that 09 to 14 era, because he was the best player, arguably, well, probably the best player in the history of the program. But the true face of that era, to me, really, if you're a historian and understand that era, was LaMichael James, because LaMichael James was a factor on 3 straight Pac-10 and 12 titles. 3 straight. Marcus only won 1. LaMichael 09, 10, 11. Okay. Also, they went to the national championship, and the year he was a Heisman candidate, and the next year they won their first Rose Bowl ever with him as the lead guy. So for me, although LaMarcus is LaMarcus James Iota, although Marcus is the face of the program's history, I think that for that era, the true face was LaMichael James. So, definitely he deserves this honor. Now, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about where he ranks in terms of the greatest running backs, but I just have to say that congratulations to him. He definitely deserves this, and it's good to see.
Well, Aaron, to your point, like people assume that Oregon's offense was based on quarterbacks. And during that stretch, it wasn't. People don't remember that Oregon led the conference, led the country in rushing. They were
like
running
300 plus.
Oh my God! And it was all based on LaMichael, and then Kenyon, LeGarrette Blount, right? And so here's the thing too. Like, I remember when LeGarrette. Well, I think a lot of people remember when LeGarrette punched the guy after the game. But what it did was put LaMichael squarely in the crosshairs. It was like, all right, here you go, young guy. Like, we don't know. It was similar, but a little different to when Travis Dye had his, hey, here you go. You got the whole thing. Because that's what LaMichael was at that time. Can this little guy really carry the load? Can this little running back really shoulder, everything that Coach Kelly's going to ask him to do? Well, hell yeah, he did. And he did it for 3 years. And the thing that people don't quite, I think people forget, they think of him as, I won't say like a scat back, but a quick and like, hey, I'm just going to get outside of you. He was, number one, so patient when he was hitting the hole. He would set it up, and then wham! I mean, he'd sit right behind those offensive line. They'd run that stretch zone, and he'd look for his hole, and then he'd hit it. People also forget about him dislocating his elbow, right? How tough that guy was. He gutted through a lot of those games, right? There's never going to be a year when you as a running back in college football are play completely healthy, but some of the stuff that he played through was absolutely incredible. And then to end up where you are, which is in the College Football Hall of Fame, so well deserved. I will say, Aaron, that to be a conference leader, a back-to-back conference champion, to be in contention for a national championship, to win a New Year's Day bowl game does not guarantee you the College Football Hall of Fame. You have to be a first-team All-American to be in consideration. So another thing for LaMichael, first-team All-American, not only was he a first-team All-American, he was a consensus All-American. And
he won the Doak too, didn't he?
Absolutely he did.
Yeah.
And so, Anthony, it's interesting because I can't imagine you can add anything else to those accolades that Joey and Aaron just poured upon him. Nothing against you, but it's funny because now you look at all the talented running backs Oregon has had, and is LaMichael the greatest running back in Oregon history in the sense of this? I'm gonna pose the question to you, and I want you guys to answer. You can draft an all-time Oregon Ducks team. Who's your first pick at running back if you've got to go out there and win one game? And this is no knock on the guys that have been incredible and have done stuff. You look at that pairing of LaMichael, his talent, his ability with that system, and it was a match made in heaven. Who do you guys feel is still, to this day, the greatest running back in program history? I know it's a big question. I'm going to start with you, Anthony.
I'm going to take LaMichael. And here's the reason why. Well, first of all, before Michael was LaMichael, I remember going down to watch practice, and I believe I was talking to Patrick Chung or TJ Ward, one of those DBs, and we were talking, I said, well, who's the toughest guy that you ever gone against to tackle? And Patrick, I believe, or it might have been TJ Ward, said, the toughest guy I've ever tackled he's on our team. He's a freshman. He doesn't play. He's LaMichael James. I was like, oh, really? Oh, I can't wait to watch this guy. And think about this for a minute. LaMichael James is about, 5'10"? Okay? He weighs about 175, 180, 180?
5'9", 190, yeah.
I was going to say, okay. 5'10" is pretty generous, don't you think?
No, yeah, so he is not the biggest guy out there. And when you talk about football, everybody's looking for these big guys, these guys who are 6'2", 220, 215. No, LaMichael is not the biggest guy, but he's one of the toughest guys on the field. He will run through you, he will run around you, and you can't catch him. And when you play against LaMichael James, here's the problem. When he touches the ball, on every play, he can take it the distance, and that's 100 yards or 10 yards or 2 yards. He will get in the end zone, and that's why he's so dangerous for the defense, because when he's getting the ball, you better have everybody get there, and you better pray that he goes down. And so watching him and watching a lot of his runs were just amazing. It just the back and forth, the breaking tackles. You know, yeah, he didn't catch the ball a whole lot out of the backfield, but he didn't have to. Just give him the ball and let him go and let him do his thing. I love watching him play. To me, he's one of the best. He is the best.
Aaron.
So what was crazy, you talked about the Blunt thing and who was going to replace Blunt, et cetera, et cetera. We saw how Jeremiah Johnson and Stewart did in this offense. But what LaMichael brought to the table was just that sudden boom. And what Chip liked to do was sometimes just run the same play over inside zone, outside zone, screen, pass here, and just over and over and over again and wear teams down. And then eventually you get LaMichael into the second level. The backers are tired, out of position, and then pow, he's out of there. And so that's when the offense went to a different level, because now Blunt was good, don't get me wrong, but Blunt didn't have that kind of home run speed. That all said, for me, there's a difference between greatest and the best. And I sort of say this when I discuss Lillard versus Walton and Drexler in terms of best or greatest player in Blazers history. To me, the best running back ever is Jonathan Stewart, because he combined the size and power of Drones and Freeman with the speed of LaMichael. They ran the exact same 40 time at the NFL Combine. However, Stewart really only had one great year because of injuries. And LaMichael, of course, rushed for 5,000 yards in 3 seasons. When Freeman broke his record, LaMichael made sure to tell me, he texted me, just remember, he needed a whole extra year to do it. And he was right. He was right. And we all love Freeman. But to me, LaMichael, greatest ever, Stewart, most talented, best ever.
Joey?
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but to me, part of the reason why Jonathan Stewart only had one true healthy year was the fact that he was just like just this load of muscle that didn't have the fluid. He didn't have the fluid nature of LaMichael, right? He didn't have the vision. He didn't have Jonathan Stewart's going to hit that hole, and he's going to hit the hole and he's going to punish you. But he didn't have the patience that LaMike did. He didn't have the patience to wait for that hole to develop and then go, right? And I think that I understand what you're saying, but I think that I think that has to be counted, in a certain sense, counted against him, because that was who he was. That was how he played. Whereas LaMichael encompassed that fluid, that patience and that explosion. I don't know. I think for me, you said it a second ago. I wish the question was, who is the greatest running back? LaMichael James. And who would you pair with him in the backfield, right? And I think I think I'd pair Reuben Drones with him. I think that would be the pairing for me with LaMike. Because, yeah, you're right, Aaron. Like, the absolute physical specimen of Jonathan Stewart was something to behold. But what LaMichael was able to do and the way in which he did it, I think makes him the greatest running back of all time at Oregon.
All right, good stuff about LaMichael there. Guys, when we come back, we're going to talk about Justin Herbert, his first ever NFL playoff start coming up here for the Chargers, our thoughts on what to expect as they take on the Jaguars. We'll be right back with Talkin Ducks. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber. Time now for What's Cooking, brought to you by Sam's Northwest BBQ, located in Sherwood, just south of Portland. Your home for Yoder Smoker products and so much more. The largest brick and mortar barbecue store in the Pacific Northwest. And Joey, Justin Herbert and the Chargers, despite all the injuries this season, and Emmanuel Achow out for him for some reason for the majority of this campaign, they make it to the playoffs and are playing against one of the surprise teams in the NFL this year, Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who beat Justin Herbert earlier this year 38-10 in LA. And so for Herbert, it feels like now, Joey, the one thing that's been missing from all these incredible stats to start his career is the postseason success. So it feels like there's a sense of gravity with these games for where Justin fits in the all-time great, that pursuit, right? He's not there, of course, but when you're building a case to be one of the all-time great NFL quarterbacks, the postseason plays such a huge role. Not that it matters to Justin, but what do you think about the importance of his first ever playoff game coming up here?
Well, you said the one thing that's missing. The one thing that's been missing is his wide receivers. I mean, let's call a spade here. Like, to not have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams for the majority of this season, as somebody who lost Charles Rogers and Mike Williams for the majority of their careers, I know what it's like to lose high-round draft pick wide receivers. It hurts. So for what he's been able to do and sustain this team through those injuries, man, more credit goes to Justin there. This is an interesting thing. He's hopefully going to get Mike Williams back this week. I think the success of guys like Patrick Mahomes at such a young age has kind of, I want to say, warped people's perspectives. He's only in, what, is this year three for Justin?
Three.
Yeah.
3 for Herbert.
I mean, let's be honest. Like, if I had gotten to the playoffs my third year, I'd have been a hell of a job. Like, I'd have been thrilled. Like, most quarterbacks would love to, would you love to get there year 2? Sure. But year 3 is kind of like, all right, let's get yourself into the playoffs. There's nothing wrong with his progression. There's no, in terms of becoming a great player in this league. This is the natural progression of players, of having some success, having some bumps, figuring it out, get yourself into the playoffs. I hope it doesn't happen. I especially hope it doesn't happen considering he's playing against Trevor Lawrence and another inexperienced quarterback. But you usually get in and, get kicked in the jaw by inexperienced quarterback, and then you learn and you come back and do it again. This is right on pace for what he should be doing in terms of quarterback progression. He's just doing it with unbelievable numbers and doing it without his 2 best wide receivers. So yeah, give the guy some credit. Let's go, man.
Aaron, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he was without Williams and Keenan Allen when they got boat raced by Jacksonville the first time. He's only in his 3rd year, as you said. And when you get taken with the 6th pick in the draft, you're going to a bad team, which means it's probably going to take a little while for that team to build around you to get to the playoffs. So, yeah, he's right on schedule. Is he going to win this weekend? I don't know, but he needs that experience. Clearly, he has amazing all-time talent. He's not going to be the greatest quarterback in history. I don't think he's going to surpass Montana or Brady or anything, or Marino or anything like that. But he has a chance to be considered one of the 10 or 15 or 20 greatest ever because he has that type of talent. But you're right, Joey. The whole Mahomes thing, I mean, for every Mahomes, Manning, and Marino, who are just amazing out the gate, there's the Bradshaws, Favres of the world who took some time to grow and develop and to become elite. I don't think Herbert's elite yet because of the interceptions, but he has elite talent, and this will be a huge step in his maturation.
All right, Aaron Fentress already saying Herbert won't be one of the all-time greats.
I
All right,
just
when we
said
come
top
back,
10 or 15.
I heard him say
Why
he's
do
one
you
of the
Joey,
10
who's got
best ever.
28
I don't
points
know.
on
10
Freddie
to 15
Live.
best ever.
today, and Anthony Newman, who can set screens and play defense on the hardwoods, because we're going to talk basketball. Aaron and I will give you Oregon men's basketball and women's basketball coming up just around the corner on Talkin Ducks. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber.
I would call it a sense of urgency. I think guys understand we've got to play better. I think our practices have been a little bit more lively. I think our focus at times has been good. And toward the end of practice, you saw where it wasn't very good. We made a lot of mistakes there. So, we're just going to have to continue to get better. And, I told the guys, our guaranteed games, we're guaranteed 32, 16 of them are done. And so we're halfway through, and we're going to have to get better. It's January 10th, and we can't make the same mistakes we were making in December. Got to get better. So that translates to a sense of urgency. I'm not sure they picked up on that, but that was what I was saying.
Well, that was Dana Altman addressing the media as the Oregon men's basketball team will get set to host both the Arizona schools at Matthew Knight Arena this upcoming week.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah, what's up?
I think I'm going to hijack this segment.
Really?
Yeah, I think I'd rather ask you about basketball than you ask me about basketball since you've been around this team. You've covered a couple of the games, called a couple of the games. You actually played basketball a little bit at Oregon, so a little bit. I think you blocked a couple of shots.
I think you just looked at the offensive stats.
Didn't you
That's why you
build
said a
Matthew
little
Knight
bit.
with the bricks you put up? No, okay. Just kidding.
All
When I
right.
come down to Arizona,
You know
you can dunk on me for
Works for
revenge.
me. You did a good job hosting when I was gone, so be my guest. I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
So please,
So
what can I help you out with here, my friend?
I had the mispleasure of watching the Colorado game.
Yeah, not a good
And then
one
I
to
missed
catch.
the Utah game. They won that one. What could you make of this team as they head into these games against Arizona? Because obviously they've been dealing with injuries. They struggle shooting the three. They're wildly inconsistent, but they've got some size, athleticism. They've brought in a lot of great recruits lately. Can they flip this thing around and survive this week and beyond?
Any win this weekend against either Arizona State or Arizona will be a very impressive win for this team. I've got Arizona still the best team in the conference, even though they slipped the other day. And then Arizona State, to me, is the most improved and most surprising team in the conference, right there with Utah. I think Arizona State has a really good chance to finish third or fourth, potentially, with USC. For Oregon, the issue is right now they're just hurt, Aaron. You've got Barthélemy and Couisnard, two of their best shooters that were going to be either starting or the sixth man that haven't played yet, really the majority of this season. And so you take away that shooting to surround Will Richardson to where he can dribble, penetrate, and kick to guys on the outside for open looks, and you're missing a huge void in your team. Now, there's a couple games where they can get hot, and Guerrier, we've seen that before from outside, and Richardson, he's not a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter guy. He's going to more so create his own looks. And then inside, and Folly Dante's been sensational, but they wanted to pair him with Biddle, and Biddle's been dealing with a foot injury, and that's difficult as a big man because you can't condition when you have that injury. So the matchup against Arizona State, the Sun Devils have the best wings, in my opinion, as far as depth in the conference. They will throw 6'6", 6'7" at you all day long to lock you up on the perimeter. So there's a lot of length there to defend against Richardson. And then their bigs do a really good job of just running the floor and slashing off the playmaking of Frankie Collins. Arizona's at another level. And if you're going to beat Arizona, you have to neutralize either Tubelis or Ballo. You can't let the two of them combine for something like 38 points on 15 of 20 shooting like they do the majority of the time. One of them has to have an off night, and then you have to pray that this team shoots 4 or 5 made threes and shoots something like 20%. That's the only way they've lost games this year, is that teams take away one of their studs, and then they've only hit 4 threes, and those losses to Utah, and that loss also at home to Washington State. So for Oregon, how do you get that done? Well, Richardson has to play at an extremely high level like he has been. Dante has to stay out of foul trouble, especially against Arizona. If you can do that and outshoot those two teams from the three-point line, then you give yourself a chance. But again, this is a depleted Oregon team that if they can just stay in the thick of it, Aaron, and then get those guys back, Biddle, Barthélemy, and Couisnard, they've got a chance to possibly make some noise come Pac-12 tournament time.
I'm sold.
Okay, that's all you need? No follow-ups? Either way, it's going to be a lot of
You
fun.
pulled the Fentress and you kind of went on there for a while. So
yeah, you know, just you cover the conference for a living also. But either way, for Oregon, any win against Arizona, Arizona State would honestly be very impressive. You usually like to sweep the home games. You would be very happy with a split here, possibly. All right, Aaron, you did a great job asking me that question. I'm going to kick you off because I'm going to talk to Kelly Graves next segment as we catch up with Oregon women's basketball as we close out this edition of Talkin Ducks. You're watching Talkin Ducks, built by PARR Lumber. All right, welcome back to Talkin Ducks. Before we wrap things up, we get a chance to catch up with Oregon women's basketball coach Kelly Graves. They're coming off a road split of the Arizona schools. They beat Arizona State, drop one to number 15 Arizona. But as we talk to Coach Graves, you hear that he loves his team. They are young, they are talented, and most importantly, they play the right way. Here he is, the man you know and love, Kelly Graves. Your only 4 losses this year, as you know, are to top 15 teams. And in 3 of those, really, you guys had a chance down the stretch. We've talked X's and O's before. What do you think it is for this team that is going to help them maybe turn some of those close games into W's as you guys continue to go through conference play?
I think defensive focus down the stretch. The Carolina game, we let their three-point shooter, shake loose late, and she got looks that she shouldn't have gotten. We missed some assignments, and at that point, we were kind of a young team. I mean, we had 3 freshmen on the court to finish that game. And then in the UCLA game, we just had, a bad third quarter, and that hurt us. And then we played catch up. But again, it starts at the defensive end and turnovers. and then Arizona, same thing. 20 turnovers. We're like top 10 in the nation in fewest turnovers and assist to turnover ratio. We're, I think, second in the country. But the two games, UCLA and Arizona, in conference play, our turnovers let us down. So, it's a couple of different things. I love, Jordan, where we're at offensively. We're one of the 10 best, most efficient offenses in the country. Every shooting number puts us in the top 10. It's just we've got to guard better.
Well, that was just a snippet of our conversation with Kelly Graves. We'll have more time with him next week. Also next week on Talkin Ducks, we'll catch up more. Men's basketball, big-time matchup at home against the Arizona Schools. We'll recap that. And, of course, football. There will be some transfer news or some player movement, and we'll obviously touch on that. But from all of us here, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.